Have you ever encountered someone whose kindness felt off? Someone whose help came with invisible strings, whose concern somehow left you feeling smaller, not stronger? At first glance, they seem like the best kind of people, compassionate, generous, deeply involved in the lives of others. But beneath the surface lies something more unsettling. A pattern, a presence, a quiet force that suffocates instead of supports. Philosophers and psychologists alike have long warned of a danger that hides not in hatred or aggression but in something far more insidious, unexamined goodness. And if Carl Jung were sitting beside us today, he might lean forward and whisper, "Beware the person who wants to save you." The moral shadow. When virtue becomes a weapon, Jung introduced us to the concept of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress, deny, or refuse to acknowledge. Most people think of this as dark impulses, envy, rage, greed. But there's a more subtle kind of shadow, and it hides in people who believe they are unquestionably good. This is the moral shadow, when the ego clings so tightly to its image of virtue that it denies any possibility of fault. In doing so, the person pushes their darkness onto others, often those closest to them. They don't raise their voice. They don't make threats. But their presence controls the room. Not through fear, but through guilt. This is the friend who always knows what's best for you, and is disappointed when you don't follow their advice. The partner who sacrifices everything, and reminds you constantly. The parent who claims to love you unconditionally, as long as you become the version of you they dreamed up. They mean well, and that's what makes them so hard to resist. Goodness as identity. The trap of the righteous self. When someone builds their entire identity around being good, criticism becomes existential. They can't just be wrong. They can't just make a mistake. Because to admit fault would be to tear down the very foundation of who they believe they are. This creates what philosophers call a totalizing self-image, where nuance disappears, where the spectrum of human behavior is replaced by a binary good people like me and bad people like you. The ancient Stoics warned about this. Epictetus wrote, "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them." When someone's opinion of themselves is so inflated with virtue, they become blind to the reality of their impact. The road to hell, as they say, remains paved with the best of intentions. Emotional colonization. When help becomes control, there is a moment, subtle, fleeting. When care turns into control, you'll know it by the pit in your stomach. The feeling that you owe them something, that their kindness must be repaid with obedience, that their presence in your life is a debt, not a gift. Psychologists refer to this as emotional enmeshment, where someone blurs the boundary between love and power. Their intentions may be pure, but the effect is suffocating. The philosopher Simone Weil once wrote, "To love purely is to consent to distance, it is to adore the distance between ourselves and what we love." But those who are addicted to their own goodness cannot allow distance. They step into your space, not to meet you but to reshape you. Not to witness your life but to curate it. And always, always with the reassurance that they only want what's best. The Messiah complex, why some people need you to be broken. Perhaps the most dangerous version of this is what Jung would describe as the Messiah complex, the deep, unconscious desire to be someone else's savior, to fix them, redeem them, heal them. But at its root lies a hidden contract. You must remain broken, so I can continue being the one who fixes you. This dynamic is not always conscious. In fact, it rarely is, but its effects are devastating. Nietzsche warned us long ago, whoever fights monsters should see to it that he does not become a monster. But in the case of the would-be savior, the monster isn't rage, cruelty, or sadism. It's control disguised as compassion. They need you to stay in crisis because without your suffering they have no purpose. And that is a dangerous place for love to live. The trap of gratitude. When saying thank you feels like submission, there is a kind of gratitude that uplifts, that opens the heart. But there's another kind. One that feels like obligation, like surrender, When someone insists they are only helping you out of love, yet becomes cold or distant the moment you assert your independence, you are witnessing conditional virtue. And it's often a sign that their kindness was never about you. It was about themselves. As Carl Rogers, the humanist psychologist, pointed out, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. But those who mean well often deny you that acceptance. They're so fixated on the version of you they want to love, they can't accept the one who stands before them. The philosophy of space. Why real love respects distance. In Taoism, there's a deep reverence for empty space. The usefulness of a cup is in its emptiness. A room is only livable because of the space it offers. True love in its highest form does the same. It does not fill every crack with advice. It does not insert itself into every silence. It does not hover over your choices with concern disguised as care. It lets you be. Jung called this holding the tension of opposites, the rare ability to sit with someone's struggle without trying to fix it. To be a witness, not a warden. Recognizing the red flags, the signals behind the smile. So how do you spot these patterns? Look for the person who never seems to need anything, who sacrifices constantly but builds quiet resentment, who appears selfless but is always the center of every emotional exchange. Watch for those who weaponize words like love, concern, and responsibility, not in service of your growth, but in service of their narrative. And most of all, pay attention to how you feel in their presence. Not what they say. How you feel. Drained, guilty, obligated. That's not love. That's control in disguise. The way out, choosing conscious connection over compulsive goodness. The philosopher Martin Buber distinguished between two kinds of relationships, I-it and I-thou. In I-it, the other person is a project, a problem, a tool. Even kindness here is functional, it serves a purpose. But in I-thou, the other is met as they are. Not to be fixed, not to be changed, but simply to be witnessed. To truly meet someone in the I-thou way, we must first dismantle the illusion of our own moral superiority. We must face our own shadow, not just the ugly parts, but also the beautiful ones we deny in others. Because sometimes the most dangerous people aren't those who openly harm, they are those who cannot see the harm hidden inside their own goodness. The gentle tyranny of good intentions philosophy is not about abstract ideas floating in the ether. It's about how we live, how we love, how we see ourselves and others. So the next time someone says, "I only want what's best for you," pause. Ask yourself, do they really? Or do they want what makes them feel needed, powerful, good? And then bravely, gently reclaim your space. Because real goodness doesn't hover. It holds, it honors, it lets you choose. The roots of moral certainty, a historical perspective. Throughout history, some of the most catastrophic decisions have been made not by those who knew they were evil, but by those who believed, with full conviction, that they were doing the right thing. Think of the Inquisitions, the Crusades, totalitarian regimes that claimed to fight for justice or unity. These weren't led by villains in the traditional sense, but by people convinced of their own moral purity. The philosopher Hannah Arendt coined the phrase "the banality of evil" after witnessing the trial of Adolf Eichmann, a Nazi officer. What struck her wasn't how monstrous he appeared, but how ordinary he was. A bureaucrat. A man who didn't froth with hatred, but followed orders, performed duties, and believed in the righteousness of his actions. This is the ultimate danger of moral absolutism. When one believes their own goodness is beyond question, they stop asking questions entirely. And in that silence, real evil can fester. The virtue trap. When nice becomes narcissism, not all dangers wear jackboots or carry flags. Sometimes they come with compliments, supportive texts, and soft voices. But underneath there's a need. A need to be seen as irreplaceable, as morally superior, as the hero in your story. This is what psychologists refer to as covert narcissism, a subtler, more socially acceptable form of manipulation. Instead of demanding praise, these individuals earn it through acts of service, often keeping a quiet scorecard. You'll know them by their resentment, their woundedness when unappreciated, their tendency to remind you, not directly but through sighs and sacrifices, just how much they've done for you. And again, it's hard to call it out, because they're so nice. But as philosopher Alan Watts once said, the road to hell is not paved with bad intentions but with misunderstood virtue, freedom and a fear of chaos. Why control masquerades as care? What makes people cling so tightly to their role as the good one? Often it's fear. To let go of control is to open the door to uncertainty. And for many, especially those raised in chaotic or unpredictable environments, this is intolerable. By stepping into the role of caretaker, savior, or guide, they feel safe, they feel in control. But the tragedy is their desire for order often disorders the lives of those they claim to help. This is where philosophy meets psychology. The existentialist Søren Kierkegaard wrote that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom, and those who fear this dizziness will do anything to avoid it, even if that means controlling others under the guise of guidance. Why letting people struggle is sometimes the greatest kindness. One of the hardest lessons in life is this: you cannot grow for someone else. You cannot make them see what they are not yet ready to see. And you cannot heal them by dragging them through your version of what healing should look like. Real love is patient, not in the passive sense, but in the deeply active choice to trust someone else's process, even if it doesn't look like yours. Philosopher and spiritual teacher Jiddu Krishnamurti once said, "The ability to observe without evaluating is the highest form of intelligence. That is what the truly wise do. They observe, they listen, they stay present without possessing. Because they know that any help which disempowers is not help, it's control with a smile." The unbearable lightness of being left alone. There's something liberating and terrifying about being truly left alone to make your own choices. Most of us crave autonomy. We say we want freedom, but when someone steps back and says, "It's your life, I trust you," it can feel disorienting. Suddenly the safety net is gone. There's no one to blame if we fall. This is why the most helpful people are sometimes so hard to let go of, even when we know their help is hurting us. They offer structure, certainty, a familiar tether. But growth by its nature requires untethering. Jean-Paul Sartre famously said, "Man is condemned to be free, because with freedom comes responsibility. And with responsibility comes the sobering realization, if I fall, it's on me." But here's the paradox: it's only when we're free that we can finally stand tall. Choosing conscious support, the new model of relating. So what does healthy support look like? It looks like boundary. It looks like silence when silence is needed. It looks like asking, "Do you want advice, or do you just want me to listen?" It means letting people fall and trusting they'll rise. It means loving people not for who they could become under your influence, but for who they are right now. And it means doing the inner work to examine your own motives. Am I helping them, or making myself feel important? Am I loving them, or molding them? Am I offering space, or smothering them with expectations? These questions are uncomfortable, but they're necessary, because otherwise we end up reenacting the very patterns we claim to detest, becoming tyrants cloaked in tenderness. When good is no longer enough, let's return to the opening question. Have you ever been hurt by someone who meant well? If you have, know this: you're not weak for needing space, you're not ungrateful for setting boundaries, and you're not cruel for walking away from those who won't let you breathe, even if they did it all for your own good. And if you recognize yourself in any of this, if you've ever been the one who meant well but left bruises anyway, there's no shame in that. Awareness is the first step toward true connection, not connection built on performance or perfection, but on presence, on patience, on a deep, unshakable willingness to love without strings, to support without shaping, and to care without controlling. In the end, goodness isn't about intentions, it's about impact. And real goodness, the kind that frees rather than binds, begins the moment we stop trying to fix people and start learning how to see them. Collective goodness. When societies become the problem, it's easy to think of this issue as purely individual. But what happens when the entire system, a culture, a government, a religion, operates under the illusion of righteousness? We create laws for your protection. We censor voices for the greater good. We invade countries to liberate them. History is littered with such paradoxes. Imperialism painted as salvation. Oppression masked as order. Indoctrination disguised as education. The philosopher Michel Foucault warned of this exact dynamic. He said that power in modern societies is not always imposed violently, it's internalized, normalized, disguised as care. He called it pastoral power, a form of control that shepherds the individual for their own good, while quietly removing their agency. This is perhaps the most dangerous form of power, the kind that doesn't feel like power at all. Because when a system believes it is inherently virtuous, it can justify anything. The performance of virtue. A modern identity crisis. Scroll through social media today, and you'll find a strange phenomenon. People declaring how kind they are, how much they care, how they're allies, advocates, healers, truth-tellers. We now live in a time where goodness has become performative, something to be displayed, curated and rewarded. But virtue, when performed, becomes hollow. As philosopher Kierkegaard observed, the truly ethical individual does not announce their goodness. They suffer silently with the tension of uncertainty. They struggle with what's right, because they know morality is rarely black and white. But on the stage of public opinion, doubt is punished. Certainty is applauded. And so we hide behind slogans, hashtags and virtue signals, not to understand each other, but to be seen as better than each other. The question is no longer what is good, but rather, how do I look good while asking it? The ethics of non-interference, what the wise rarely do. There's a concept in Eastern philosophy that speaks directly to this with the Taoist principle of non-doing or effortless action. It doesn't mean passivity. It means recognizing the natural flow of things and intervening only when necessary, and only with humility. Lao Tzu writes, "The sage does not try to control the world, he is not foolish enough to think he can." Western culture often interprets wisdom as knowing more, doing more, fixing more. But sometimes wisdom is knowing when not to act, when not to rescue, when not to advise, when not to project your own timeline onto another person's soul. In this light, true ethical maturity is not about constant intervention, but the discipline of restraint, the ability to hold space without invading it. The parent, the partner, the friend roles that shape and distort. Let's bring this closer to home. Think of the mother who micromanages her adult daughter's choices, fearing she'll repeat the same mistakes. The boyfriend who lovingly isolates his partner, believing she needs him to protect her. The friend who always gives advice, even when none is asked for, because they can't stand to see you in pain. These roles, parent, partner, friend, come with cultural scripts, expectations, norms. But when we over-identify with them, we begin to act on behalf of the role, not in true relationship with the person. We stop seeing the individual and start seeing a project, a reflection of ourselves, a mirror we try to polish because its image reflects our worth. Philosopher Martin Buber described this as the difference between I-it and I-thou relationships. I-it treats the other as an object, a role, a means to an end. I-thou sees the other as a sacred being, unknowable, irreducible, free. When we mean well but control others, we've slipped into I-it, and the path back is presence, forgiveness of the misguided, understanding without excusing. Now let's address the emotional wound at the heart of this. If you've been harmed by someone who meant well, your pain is real, and your confusion is valid, because it's hard to hold two truths at once. They were trying to help, they hurt you deeply. But philosophy teaches us to live with tension, to resist the urge for neat answers. You can forgive someone without excusing them. You can understand their pain without letting it become yours.
You can set boundaries not to punish, but to protect your own growth. And you can walk away with love in your heart, even if they never see why you had to leave. Because wisdom isn't loud, it's quiet, grounded, and fiercely honest. What if the most loving thing is to let go? So here's the question I want to leave you with. What if the most loving thing is to step back, not out of apathy, not out of spite, but out of deep respect for the other person's path? What if letting someone fall is not neglect, but trust? What if withholding advice is not distance, but faith? What if choosing not to shape someone is the only way to love them for who they actually are, not who you need them to be? In a world desperate for direction, noise and influence, maybe the rarest act of goodness is silence, the kind of silence that holds, that respects, that does not fix, does not chase, does not beg, but remains open.